think most people around the Chicago Bulls fandom, most people around the NBA, all agree the Chicago Bulls are a mess. And they're one of the bigger messes in the NBA right now because of their lack of direction as well as other things. On today's episode, we're going to talk about why the Chicago Bulls are such a mess, right? Even despite the recent winning. We'll talk a little bit about that, plus the latest in the Nikola Vucevic to the Golden State Warriors rumors, and preview tonight's game against the New Orleans Pelicans. We're going to get to all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. And the Bulls are a mess. The Bulls are a mess. My favorite franchise in all of sports is a mess, right? And most of you guys know, I run Chicago Bulls Central, I run Chicago Bears Central, I run Chicago Sky Central, and I do NBA Central, right? And the thing around that is that I'm a bigger Bears fan than Bulls fan. Most people may not actually realize that. Here's what I'll say. My emotions are kind of more ingrained in the Bears, but I'm a hugely emotional Bulls fan. And I think that when you look at the Bulls have been a mess, and they are going to continue to be a mess for a while, right? And this is going to be a little different than most of my episodes. You know, I like to get analytical. I like to look at stats. I like to look at all of that. I just want to talk to Bulls fans here for a second, right? The place that this franchise is in is not only one that is like you. There's certain things that you can get behind, right? And there's certain things that you look at this franchise and you just question what the goal or the purpose is. I had an episode yesterday in which I've talked about the Chicago Bulls not having a direction. And the last time that the Bulls really felt like they had a direction was around, in 2020-21-22 season, going into that season after acquiring Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, Alex Cruz, so to add that to Zach LaVine, Vooch, P. Will, and just how that team really felt like a team that was going forth into a path, right? And since then, it's really felt like the Bulls have just kind of hovered around, not really knowing what they do. They first didn't know how to rebound from the Lonzo Ball injury. Then at that point in time, they didn't really know they didn't recognize when they were going to be moving off some of the players, which has led to some of the deals that we've seen done. And now you see this Bulls team in the year that the pick that they sent out to acquire DeMar DeRozan, who's not even on the roster anymore, is one of the reasons why there's so much conversation about where this Chicago Bulls team should go. So much discourse between certain Chicago Bulls fans come between their thoughts and their ideals on what to do with this situation on keeping the pick or not keeping the pick. Now, here and on Locked On Bulls yesterday, I talked about the fact that the Bulls' chances to guarantee that they keep their top 10 pick have basically all but gone, right? It just is. It's all but gone. And even though the Bulls still are in the bottom 10, right? They are very well still in the bottom 10 as of right now. As of today, the season ended today, the Chicago Bulls have the 9th worst record in the NBA, and they would have their pick, but then depending on what happens with the lottery, that's what you got to see what's going to happen there, right? As far as the Bulls maybe and potentially, keeping that pick. And, that's already something that adds some discourse and question around the direction of the team. But then you look at the team on the court, right? And you have, in a year where the Bulls went younger, right? They are the rosters on average 3 years younger than last year's roster. And while 3 years doesn't seem like a lot in basketball, that's a big difference from year over year to go that much younger with your roster, especially while you still kept pieces like Vooch, kept pieces like Zach LaVine, kept pieces like Torrey Craig and Javon Carter still on this roster, right? So that's something, right, with this team that they've gone into that younger path, that younger direction, and yet you're still in the same place. And some could say this, right? If you send off Alex Caruso, you send off DeMar DeRozan, you lose Andre Drummond, you add into that Josh Giddey, Jalen Smith, who you brought in here as well, right? And you're still on the path to have at least the same amount of wins that you had last year. Okay. All right. Right? So there's that aspect of things as well, right? But when you look at it, like this team is just so confusing and maddening at times because of the way that they go about things. Not only the communication, right? We don't have a very transparent front office. I know, people. There are legitimate reasons to have issues with Billy Donovan, but as far as what's going on with injuries, things like that, Billy's been the most communicative one in the Bulls front office in any type of leadership role with the Bulls on those type of things. But then you look at teams as far as like around where the Bulls are. Let's just look at the Eastern Conference, right? We'll go from 8th all the way to the end of the bottom of the Eastern Conference is a better way to word that. At 8th, you have the Detroit Pistons. I think the Detroit Pistons have a clearer path, right? They are really developing their roster. They reportedly, they can be buyers or sellers at the trade deadline. Coming into the season, it was reported that the Detroit Pistons were willing to take on bad salary if it meant them getting more assets. Okay, cool, right? Now it's kind of been reported that, maybe they are looking to acquire something. They're not going to try to go heavily, but they could acquire a player that could help them. They have $14 million in cap space. Shout out to the Detroit Pistons. The Atlanta Hawks, they got the number 1 overall pick last year. They got Jalen Johnson. They got a young player that's really developing, and you could really see what he's going to be. They got a nice young core there as well. Dyson Daniels, they got a nice young core that's not just playing, but they're actually one of the reasons why when they do win games, they're winning games, right? Now, they sit right at 500, so, they still sit in the middle of the pack in a lot of ways, but I think that their direction's a little bit more clear. Got the Bulls. We know it is what it is when it comes to the Bulls. Like, we got Vooch, we got Zach playing at a really good level. Kobe and Josh Giddey are starting to find out their balance. That was one of the biggest stories coming into that. But we still don't really know. Like, whereas the Atlanta Hawks have Dyson Daniels, Jalen Johnson, right? Sarr, they have these guys that you see and you kind of know, you're starting to know what they're going to turn into, right? You're starting to see that. Like Dyson Daniels, Jalen Johnson, you definitely see that. I said Sarr, I meant Zachary Richer. And they have Zachary Richer there, who is getting better but still has tons of questions, right? Like, so averaging 10.7 points per game. So we still got to know what level of NBA player that he has, but they're still going younger, right? Yeah, they still have players like Clint Capella that they are looking and hopefully shopping that may not fit what they have going on. But overall, as long as they have Jalen Johnson, as long as they have Dyson Daniels and Trae Young playing at the level that they do, we know that they're going to be competing, right? Then below the Bulls, you have the Philadelphia 76ers. They have a direction, but at the same time, like, how successful are they going to be is the question in that. Then you got the bottom feeders, the Brooklyn Nets, Toronto Raptors, Charlotte Hornets, Washington Wizards. Those teams are all in varying degrees of rebuilding and are building still, so to say. The Toronto Raptors have gone clearly in a path where they're trying to build around Scotty Barnes and how successful that's going to be or not. And the Bulls just are in this their place where they're in between even those two. They're not the bottom. They're not as bad as the bottom of the Eastern Conference. They're right around where the Detroit Pistons and Atlanta Hawks are record-wise. But then when you look at the future of those teams, they're a little bit brighter because their young players are playing at a better level than the Bulls are right now. Cade Cunningham is at a higher level than, of course, Julian Phillips, Dalen Terry, those type of guys, right? But we still got Kobe. We got Josh Giddey. We got things like that. And it's just the execution of this front office is maddening at times, right? And it leads it for it to be so many questions. When you look at a player like Kobe White, and you could kind of, in a way, right? I'm not saying one for one, different positions, different types of players. So I want to be clear there. Very different types of players. But when you look at how Kobe White's season last year, right? And the season that he had last year, second in most improved player of the year voting, the best statistical season that he had as far as every aspect of the game of basketball. And the fact that we changed his role again after that and asked him to do some things at the beginning of the season that just did not fit his game. You look at Jalen Johnson for that. Had what many people was called a breakout season last year, going from averaging 5.6 points per game in 2022-23 to 16 points per game in 2023-24. But what did the Hawks do? The Hawks put him in a better situation to help take advantage of the things that he showed in the years prior. And that is what is really, really frustrating about this team, is that we have players that break out. And then we are like, all right, cool. Let's change what you did last year. Now, Kobe has his own fault in that as well. I'm not blaming that strictly on just the role change. Kobe has to be a more consistent player overall. I'm just using that as an example. You can even look at that with Io to a certain degree, right? As much as we talk about and this, again, For my Josh Giddey fans, this is not to knock Josh Giddey. This is just to talk about what happened, right? You also, with Ayo Dosunmu, you saw what he turned into and grew into last year. And you went to change his role. Now, he's adapted. He's been an adaptable player his whole entire career here with the Bulls. So, all right, maybe you thought that was just, you just looked at Ayo Dosunmu and the glue guy aspect of his game, and you said, all right, bet. Yeah, we're going to change Ayo's role, but we feel like, all right, he's going to be cool, right? So it is what it is when it comes down to it. Overall, when we talk about direction with this team, we mean that a direction in which if you're going to be bad, you're at least adding assets or you're doing something like that. If you're going to be good and you're going to compete, then what this team has failed to do for years is actually add to this team. Now, Andre Drummond, we did add Andre Drummond to the team, and Andre Drummond played amazingly well while he was here in his role. There's some usage issues with how Billy Donovan used him and things like that. It is what it is, right? And it's just, you sit in this place and you just watch this franchise. And when you watch other franchises around the NBA, even when they do have a down season, how they go into that, or they have a star that they're building around, right? Like the New Orleans Pelicans came into this year expecting for them to be a team that was competing at least for a playing spot. They have 8 wins on the season, and they're open to moving their whole entire roster because they realize this is our time, right? If we're going to move off this roster, if we needed any sign to move off of these pieces, the time is now. Right now, we'll see what they do at the trade deadline. They could wait to the draft to start trading off some of those pieces, right? The Utah Jazz the Jazz. That franchise is just run. They're almost as confusing as the Bulls. It's like they had talent. And they're like, oh, but we want more picks. Let's trade these guys. Like it's weird with the Jazz. The Jazz are in a really weird place. But overall, like this Bulls team is just one that every time we see something from this team, it's like, can you believe it? That's another thing that sucks. It's like, can you believe it? Right now, this team is sitting here in the 10th seed right now, the 9th worst record in the NBA. On pace to make the play-in tournament, which is perfectly fine. But what comes after that, right? And it's easy to say, hey, we should hold on to our pieces. Okay, we hold on to those pieces, and we're around this same area for how long, right? For how long? How much longer do we just hover around the middle, right? Or are you finally aggressive of going out? You got $56 million in space this year to use underneath the first tax apron. Now, some of that's going to be eaten up by Josh Giddey's contract and his extension. It is what it is there. But what is the next step, right? And that's always what we're looking at with this team, is what's next. And that's why I've said before and recently that, listen, the Bulls keeping their pick it only does so much. They still got to get the right guy. They still got to develop that guy. They still got to make time for that guy. You still got to do all these things, right? Even if you were to keep that pick. And so it's just, hey, it's maddening. This team, this franchise is in such a place that you question everything that they do. At least I do, right? At least I do. I'll say that much. But we'll see what happens. Maybe some things change. Maybe some things alter, and we end up looking at this team at the end of this year, and we say, hey, this team really showed us something. Because they had some signs of that, and we'll see what we can do with that. But for that, you got to win your games. And so the Chicago Bulls do have a game today, which we'll get into with the Pelicans. But before we get into that, we did get some updates on the reported trade talks or offer from the Golden State Warriors. We don't know how serious it is. We've heard varying degrees of how serious these talks have been. But it seems like right now, the Golden State Warriors are offering Kyle Anderson, Gary Payton II, Kevon Looney, and a protected first-round pick. Now, I know that we heard that you either get the pick. We heard before that it was either you get Kyle Anderson and a first-round pick, or you get Moses Moody, a package built around him, and no first-round pick. So this is the package where the Bulls get the first-round pick. Now, the problem with this is that in sending 3 players back to the Chicago Bulls, the Bulls can't take those players back unless they send out 3 players. Now, if you're looking at if you're putting this trade into a trade proposal machine, you'll see that it doesn't work, right? Because then even if the Bulls do include, some lower end contracts, even a THT, which is a vet minimum contract, or a Torrey Craig in this, you start not being able to match that money. So it's going to come down to this. If the Golden State Warriors want Nikola Vucevic, they're going to have to get a third team involved. And that's why I don't think that this trade is going to happen. Could the Bulls move Vooch? Yeah, it's a possibility. But I don't think that this trade is going to happen in the way that it is currently being presented as the offer, mainly because of the Bulls just don't have the open roster spots and we don't have the salary that just fits it, right? So, we'll see what happens. I've said it before, and I keep saying it. I'm starting to think less and less that the Chicago Bulls actually make a move. Because not only do you have to have somebody that's willing to make the move with you, right? You have to have a partner in the trade, but you also have to have somebody who can get it done, right? You have to have space. You have to have something that makes sense. And so right now, the Bulls don't have a deal that really all fits. And the Bulls having a full roster of 15 guaranteed contracts is very, very difficult to find flexibility in that, because now you have to match exactly. Not only do you have to match the salary, you got to match the number of players that you're acquiring and sending out as well, unless the other team has a little bit of space in that. So that's where it comes down to. You're going to hear, we're a few weeks away from the trade deadline, you're going to hear more and more trade talks every single day. Every single day, you're going to hear more and more. And it just comes down to what is the real and what's not. And I try to add some clarity to that, right? I try to, when I talk about these trade proposals or these trade rumors, is to add the realistic side of it, right? Because, you're going to see writers that just write for the sake of writing for trade, right? And we know what type of business that does around this time of year as far as clicks when you're writing about trade talks. But the Bulls now, and that's one of the things, is that with having a fully guaranteed roster and not even a player that's partially guaranteed to where you can waive to create some space, it means that the Bulls are going to have to. It's not as tight nearly as like the second tax apron teams, but it's about as restrictive as you can be. The Bulls also have a $17 million trade exception, which I don't really expect them to use during this season. Maybe in the offseason, depending, especially with the cap space that they have, they maybe can use that, get a little creative there. But ultimately, like, for the Bulls to make a trade, it's going to have to be 1-for-1 on salary. We do have a little bit of room under the first tax apron as well to where we can take back a little bit more money without going into the luxury tax. So that's an avenue that the Bulls have as well. But I think I may put together a tomorrow where we don't have a game, or is it a back-to-back? I think we have a back-to-back. So maybe we have a game Tuesday and Wednesday. But the next day that we don't have a game, what I may do is put together an emergency episode, and we may call it like the trade season primer, so that everybody can kind of know. Let me know if there's interest in that, so everybody can kind of know what the Bulls are working with heading into the trade deadline, what assets they have, what's movable with their first, what's not movable, how much salary can they acquire versus what they can send out, those type of things that we can look at, and we'll take a look at that. Now, with this Warriors trade, the one thing that I do want to talk about before we get off of it is that in this trade that's being proposed here, the Bulls would acquire $17 million in expiring contracts. And when you look at that, Vooch has an additional year on his contract after this season. That is another thing that could entice the Chicago Bulls in this type of move, is the fact that they would lessen this, because again, $56 million below the first tax apron. If you get $17 million that expire at the end of this season, you can add that to the Bulls as well and give them a little bit more flexibility to do whatever they want with. At that point, the Bulls would have nearly $70 million in below the first tax apron next year. And they'd have their exceptions, and they'd have their $17 million trade exception. That's a lot of assets you can use to try to improve your team or take on bad salary to get more assets, whatever you want to do. It's just, will the Bulls use it? Typically, no, but we'll see. Let me know what you guys think on that down below. With that said, all right, let's go ahead and get into the game. So we play off against the Pelicans today, and this is the first game in a very winnable week for the Chicago Bulls. When you look at it, we have a back-to-back with them and the Hawks today and tomorrow. And then we on Friday we play against the Hornets, which is another winnable game. And then we play against the Trailblazers on Sunday, another winnable game. So the Hawks game, of course, is the team with the best record that's on. This is their only team at 500 or above. Every other team that we face off against is below 500. So this is the first game of a stretch of winnable games for the Chicago Bulls. And this is an important stretch, because if the Bulls were to win out, let's say they win all 4 of these games, that talk that I said that the Bulls have little to no chance to keep their first round pick outright, they would need lottery luck, that's going to seal it. You're not going to fall into the bottom 6 for sure if you win these next 4 games. Now, with that also said, if the Bulls do somehow, let's say they come out of this one a non-favorable, if you go through these 4 games and you come out of this 1-3, I think that would show the Chicago Bulls really how far they are in competing, in my personal opinion. But the first matchup up is against the Pelicans. Zion Williamson is back, And it's going to be interesting to see who guards Zion. It's probably going to be Patrick Williams. I think that's the most likely scenario in this. And Pat has not necessarily done the best against Vooch. Against Zion. Now, he has had some solid defensive games against Zion, and it really depends on how locked in Zion is. But that's going to be the matchup to really watch in this game, is the matchup of Zion and Patrick Williams and how well Patrick Williams can defend Zion Williamson tonight, right? Now, other than that, we need the same thing. Hopefully, at some point, we get Ayo and Kobe back. As of right now, I think they're both still questionable. Torrey Craig's still out, of course. He's going to be out for a while. And we'll see who plays tonight against this Pelicans team. But this is a winnable game for the Bulls. And they haven't always taken care of business against teams that are winnable games. And let's see if they can do it. Keep in mind, we lost against this team on opening night, 123-111. This is the chance for the Chicago Bulls to revenge the opening loss, and we'll see what they can do there. But you guys can let me know how you feel on everything down below. Make sure you're following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you, lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.